Hey guys, I just wanted to say hello before I flip into the notepad version of life. This is our video about dimensions. All of that information is in chapter 6 of the book in much more detail and with labeled drawings. So if you need a more complete reference, that is where to look. In the meantime, I'm going to kind of walk you through the diagrams and principles of dimensioning, and I've also posted up on the blackboard a quick version of notes taken from the chapter so that you'll have those as a reference too. Okay, let's start looking at dimensions and notes. Okay, so here we go into the land of dimensions. Dimensions are part of the notes and the dimensions together are the annotation of the drawing that provides enough information for the shop to build it. Okay, so the rule of thumb there is, can the specifications provided be interpreted only in one way, and are they complete enough to build and finish the project without additional information? There's only one exception to that rule, and that is when I am, as a designer, looking for support from my technical director to find the best way of building something. So in a preliminary drawing, my notes might say, what material should this be made out of to get this effect, rather than speccing the particular material that I want it to be made out of. There are two systems in terms of dimension layout, okay? So we have the unidirectional dimensioning system. This is also noted as right reading, and that's because when you're looking at the page, the drawing as a whole, you can read them all. They're all right side up for you as you read the drawing. The other option is to do your dimensions aligned. And so in that case, the dimension itself is aligned with your dimension line, okay, as opposed to being aligned always horizontally, okay? In that case, you want your drawing to be read vertically or from the right-hand side of the page. You still want to be as consistent as possible in the orientation of your dimensions. So unidirectional or aligned. I tend to go for the unidirectional option, but that's my personal preference. I like it when I can look at the drawing and read everything from the bottom of the page looking up. Next concept to think about are principles and techniques. And if you look in the book, there's like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, like 4 pages, okay, of detail in terms of how we address each different type of dimension line, okay? So I think that the first 2 elements or components to think about are extension lines and then dimension lines, okay? So your extension lines are the lines that point at whatever part of the object we're trying to draw, okay? So this right here is an extension line, okay? Because it's extending the line out to the point where the dimension will intersect with it, okay? This says no. The other component would be the actual dimension line. So when we say extension line, we're talking about this vertical line, pulling the dimension out away from the drawing. When we talk about dimension line, we're talking about the horizontal line, a line which is equivalent to the part that is dimensioned. Does that make sense? So we have extension lines that extend your visible profile, and then we have dimension lines that run between the extension lines in order to note where the dimension falls, okay? Your extension lines generally don't want to cross each other unless they have to, and you try not to use lines coincident with the profile of the object. So I'm going to do a demonstration of how I would set up my dimension lines and my extension lines. So let me grab the worksheet, and we'll do just part of problem A here on this worksheet. I'll do like this top corner. So when we think about extension lines, we always want to work inside towards the outside. I'm actually going to just turn this sideways so I can do this edge. Okay, so the furthest distance from the drafting is going to be the complete length of the side. So in this case, I would do a dimension line, and I'm pulling it from about 1/8 of an inch outside of the object because I don't want to intersect the object if I don't have to. And then I'm pulling it straight up away. Okay, so that's the outside-most line in terms of that edge. And again, I'm starting a little bit away from the object and pulling it up. Okay, so those are my extension lines. Next are going to be any that are inside of that, right? So that's the most broad opening, and I can then create a dimension line that runs perpendicular to that extension line and connects these two. So I'll do something like this, and I'll leave a gap in the center for whatever that actual measurement would be, and then I'll use a filled, like a tightly filled arrow. And here's the like guidance about arrowhead types. So you can use a dot, but it's not cool, so don't. You can use a diagonal line, but that, again, that's not really typical. The typical choice is to draw a solid arrowhead using these proportions, right? So it's 1 to 3 in terms of its distance, right? So if this is the 1, this would be the 3, and we would then fill that arrow in, okay? So you'd use a filled arrowhead. That's something you can take some time to practice so that you're able to like draw clean arrowheads. They want to be pretty dark so that they're clear. And we should do that where you can see it, huh? That's better. And then we'll just kind of fill them in, yeah? You can get a little bit of style going if you want. So if you wanted to like do a little situation like that, you could. As long as they're pointing clearly at the object, okay? So this is going to get arrowheads inside because there's plenty of space. That's a shit arrowhead. You're going to do better. I believe in you. Okay, this one's okay though. That one doesn't look too bad. And then I would letter in what that dimension is. I don't know, so I'm just going to do 8 foot. Still got it, man, with the lettering. Well, the 8 is a little whack, but basically there, right? Okay, so that's how I would dimension that long edge. Now I'm going to go in and do the next set of dimensions, because again, I want to go from as far out to as far in. So it looks something like that. If I wanted to do an additional row of dimensions, then like if I wanted to mark this distance, for example, then I might pull this out a little further in order to put an inside line here. What this is doing is preventing my extension lines from intersecting or crisscrossing over my dimension lines, okay? So like a thing that would be a no-no, that would be bad, would be to take this dimension line and like crisscross every which way and do a dimension out here, okay? Because then we have this intersection that's confusing. Sometimes you have to do that because things are at odd angles to each other, but it's not ideal. So the other thing I'm doing, right, is I'm actually pulling from this point, right? So instead of leaving that dimension line, that extension line there, it should cross the object line to identify the actual points that they're pulling from. So that's my boo-boo, right? So we would put that actually to go through the object line. And the way that you will differentiate them is that this is a lighter lead, right? Or a thinner line weight. Okay. You want to make sure your object lines are super solid and strong, and your dimension lines are a lighter or thinner line weight. Okay, so that's sort of your idea when you think about extension lines and dimension lines, right? You want to leave that little 1/16 gap of space between the object line and the dimension. And then you want to space these as evenly as possible throughout your drawing. So if you don't have enough space to do these side-by-side dimensions, you can also stagger them. So like if they needed to be closer together, you could put this one up here and that one right there, and then they could be tighter to each other, right? Because you still wouldn't have to overlap your lettering on the space. So then we talked about arrows, great. We talked a little bit about a leader line, right? So this is a leader line. This is actually also, like what I've done right here is a leader line. Sometimes if you have something like this which says open, you would draw a set of leader lines like that to indicate that that whole area is covered or open in this case. And you can do the same thing with a material choice. So like if you're talking about a wood floor, you can just write wood floor and then do the little zigzaggy squiggle leader lines with the arrows on each end, and that indicates that. Let's see. So we talked about the dimension placement section, okay? So that means you want your longer dimensions, like 8'0", outside of your smaller dimensions. And then you want to just make sure that everything is staggered so that it's clear. And you want to place, if you have two views that are right next to each other, you want to place those dimensions in between those two views, right? So if these were actually the same, and they're not, if it was the same drawing, you would place that dimension in the in-between space. However, because that will be clearer then as to what points line up. So that's like if you have your top view and your front view, then you would place, so let me just do, this is why I have the sketch pad component in life, right? So if I have my orthographic projection, I've got my top view of my step unit, and then I've got my front view of my step unit, and I've got my side view of my step unit, right? I would place my dimension here, right? Dimension numbers, right? Because that is the space between these two, and this dimension equals that dimension, okay? And you want to do that, right, in order to minimize this kind of situation, right? I'm not going to have to pull that dimension in that direction if I can pull it from over here instead. And then I don't have to overlap the actual object line using a dimension. So you want to provide sufficient dimensions, but don't add duplicates, right? So don't duplicate that information unless it helps make it clearer, okay? So another thing that you want to do is avoid putting dimensions all four sides of a view if you can. Keep it clean on the top and the side, or in the space in between and on the sides. That is going to make the drawing clearer for the person who's seeing it. There are also cases when you would be clearer by placing a set of dimensions on one side and another set of dimensions on the other side. So clarity is really your most important goal. Let's see, we talked about lettering dimensions. Always use your hyphen, right? So it's 1 foot dash 0 inches, not 1 foot 0 inches, right? You always want that space and that dash because it'll make it clearer if you have a fraction, right? So if it's like 1 foot dash 0 and 1/2 inches, that dash is helping us clarify the fact that we're talking about 1 foot and 1/2 an inch, not 1 foot and 1/2, which is not a way that you can write a scale out, as we may have discussed before. So that's lettering. Circles and arcs are indicated by, let me pull that sheet from the book so we can see it. So circles and arcs. Right, so we talked about that. Talked about that. Talked about this. Talked a little bit about this. Here's your that's helpful. Let's talk a little bit about notes. You guys don't really have notes that you need to provide on this drawing unless you feel like being creative, but you should definitely take a look at all of this information in the drafting book. Okay, so when you're drafting a set, you want to use your notes to convey what materials you're going to be using. You want your notes to clarify how each individual element is being procured or what the drawing is actually meaning, right? So like right here, we've got a little leader line situation, right? Pointing with like the zigzag lines. So they're using these zigzag lines with an arrow on the end, and then they're drawing, and then they're writing the note, right? So in this case, it's PVC, candles, right? And then it's giving dimension to those, all right? It's also indicating scale, all of that kind of stuff, but we'll actually do that using drawing labels. Here are some abbreviations that we use. They're also in the notes document that I sent you. So these are all pretty commonly used. Most of the words mean what you think they do. The one that I use the most probably is typical, and that is something I would use anytime I'm dimensioning something that is found multiply across the drawing. So if it's in a bunch of different places, I would use typical to indicate that it would be typically this size, and then I don't have to label every single one. And then the last thing we'll talk about is labeling scenic units. This is going to be a little more clear on a full drawing set, which is why I'm going to send you the Lysistrata drafting package, and you can kind of look at the way that I'm connecting things from the ground plan into the elevations. But typically your drawing label is going to give the title of the drawing and then the scale, right, and the drawing number. So when we're talking about walls or scenic units, we actually would use letters typically as drawing numbers. So it might be actually A, center window wall, right? Drawing title, drawing scale. The other standard is going to be to have a circle with a line through it. And in that case, the top piece is going to be your drawing number, and then the bottom under the line will be the sheet number. So this is when we're referencing another sheet in our drawing package. So if it isn't all on the same plate, if we're referencing another plate, and this is going to come up a lot in your ground plan, that you need to make reference to what plate you would find the various elements on. This is how you do that. If we look over here, it's an example of a set of drawing labels. Here's one that's hand drafted. Okay, so each of these scenic walls just has a leader line and a unit number, okay, pointing at that piece of wall. And then you can also see a lot of really great examples of pulling dimensions outside of the drawing whenever you can, providing as much detail as you would need to actually like tape out this set. So I don't expect dimensions on your ground plans for this project, but I would like to see drawing labels, okay? So on your ground plan, I'd love it if you would do drawing labels, if not actually dimensioning your ground plan. The other thing you'll see, so here's an example. The other thing you'll see if there are platforms involved is you'll see something like that, which gives you a height that that platform is rising to, okay? These individual stairs are all just marked with leader lines, like what stair is being referenced. So you could use that to indicate your stairs in your ground plan view. And then you would write in the height of that platform at the top. But you shouldn't need to write in the individual steps because all of that information would be provided in the elevations. So if you want to provide those heights in little circles, the way that I did in that one assignment sheet, you can. Or you can just give the total height of the main platform areas, which will be also clear in your ground plan. Because the thing that is going to help us out the most is going to be these drawing labels that point to where you're going. Okay, so what does this mean for you? What do I want to see for your scenic drafting package, you ask? Well, I have an answer for you. So I would like to see on your ground plan, drawing labels, right, to direct us to a sheet. So, for example, if this is that wall, right, on that wall, on that set, okay, I might put a leader line, do a little circle, little line in the middle of it, and call it like A on sheet 3, right? Or A on sheet 4. And I would do it with a pencil, and I would maybe give myself enough space to actually letter in that content. But this then indicates what piece that is, and if I go over to my elevation, if I go over to sheet 3, I'll find it listed as wall A. So that is on your ground plan what I'm looking for, and then I want so that, and then I want elevation of levels. Okay, and this is only on the set, not in the house. Great. Your section view doesn't need any particular dimensions or notes, so you can just flip the page right on past that. But then for your elevations, I want dimensions for each drawing that provide adequate information to build. All right, guys, so that's it on dimensions and notes. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and definitely let me know if you have any questions. Bye.